I just hear some gut level reactions, responses to Jesus' words this morning, the story of Joseph. Great, Jesus. So there's a question that's been haunting me this week as I've been thinking about these readings. And it's a question as old as the human experience. And yet it's as fresh as the dew on the grass this morning. What does it mean to love our enemies in a world that seems to manufacture new ones daily? Anyone come to mind? It's easy to hate. Question that echoes through time. It's as old as the stones on the roads to Jerusalem and the streets of our cities. From the depths of our own deepest personal betrayals to the heights of the national and global conflict. Then and now. So from up here in the hills, you wouldn't imagine there's any conflict. We have this beautiful tapestry, the Bay Area spread before us. But there's another landscape, a profound landscape that exists not out there, but within each one of us. We're all like icebergs to one another. All we see is the tip, but there's a whole lot going on underneath. As Walt Whitman once wrote, we contain multitudes within us. The critic and the criticized. The one who loves and the one who withholds love. The one seeking revenge and the one yearning for reconciliation. These divisions live between the gap of who we aspire to be and who we fear we really are. And if you're anything like me, it's the gap between the serene, wise, spiritual leader I try to project every week and the person who occasionally still mutters in traffic. Or on the pickleball court. These divisions exist in a voice that whispers, "You're not good enough," just as another voice insists you are worthy of love. These divisions exist. They manifest in our struggles with forgiveness, with resistance to change, in our fear of vulnerability. But then Jesus steps into this inner landscape, this inner battlefield that's going on, and his words are like lightning. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Our clergy group was, do you really pray for Donald Trump? So there's a part of me that wants to say, thanks, Jesus. Really helpful. Given all the hatred and division in the world, couldn't you have just said, try not to actively hate people? And call it a day? And yet, here we are, confronted with this radical command in a world where hatred seems to grow faster than we can count. It seems to be growing exponentially. But I want to lift up something, not out there, but in here, because I think that perhaps the hardest enemy to love is the one we find in the mirror, the one we hear inside of ourselves, those parts of ourselves that we want to reject, deny, or keep hidden away in shame, consciously or unconsciously, often the latter. This teaching isn't just about personal psychology. It's about the very nature of divine love. I think when Jesus speaks these words, it's not self-help. It's not, the goal isn't just to find inner peace, but that might come. He's inviting us into the very heart of being unbounded love, which is who we're called to be, which is who we really are. It's a way that refuses to let hatred have the last word. It's a way of seeing God even in those who deny it in us or in others. It's a high bar. It's maybe an impossible bar. Think about Joseph in our stories today. How many of you have been betrayed by family members, people you love? Try to imagine what it was like for him. This is a man who had every right to hatred. His own brothers, consumed by jealousy, threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. They ripped him from everything he knew, just like a tree torn from its roots. But Joseph's greatest struggle wasn't just with his brothers. It was within himself, within his own landscape. The battle between bitterness and forgiveness. Between that wounded child, so hurt, so angry, that wanted revenge, and the man who glimpsed a higher purpose. When power fills his hands like water later on, when he could pour out vengeance like a rushing stream, what does he do? He weeps. He embraces. He chooses love that's as disruptive as a spring rising up, breaking up the concrete. In that moment, Joseph isn't just reconciling with his brothers. He's reconciling with himself, with his own past, with the boy who was betrayed, and with dreams that were deferred. His story teaches us that reconciliation isn't just about mending external relationships. It's about healing the fractures within our own souls. And sometimes the greatest act of resistance to hatred is to refuse to let it change who we really are. John Lewis, that great prophet of our time, understood this path deeply. As Brother Rod read this morning, John Lewis tells us, you are a light. You are the light. Never let anyone, any person, or any force dampen, dim, or diminish that light, your light. Study the path of others to make your own way easier and more abundant. Lean toward the whispers of your own heart. Discover the universal truth and follow its dictates. Release the need to hate, to harbor division, and the enticement of revenge. Release all bitterness. Hold only love. Only peace in your heart, knowing that the battle of good to overcome evil is already won. These words are not just poetic. They're practical theology of transformation. When John Lewis speaks of light, he's talking about that divine spark within each one of us that hatred threatens to destroy or extinguish. When John Lewis calls us to release bitterness, he's not asking us to forget injustice, but to refuse to let injustice define us. When he speaks of the battle already being won, he's pointing to a truth that's deeper than any current conflict. The truth that love is more fundamental to the universe than hatred. Howard Thurman understood this deeply as well, and he described what he called the anatomy of hatred. He writes, "It begins with contact devoid of warmth. It devolves into unsympathetic understanding, and then it finally reaches a crucial point where cold understanding expresses itself in active ill will. This happens not just between people, but within ourselves, in how we relate to our own imperfection and failures." So, Thurman's insight is that hatred isn't just an emotion. It's a process. It's a journey of moving away, disconnection from ourselves, from our true nature. And so if hatred is a process away from, then love must be a journey back to our essential connection with everything, back to our fundamental unity, back to the truth, and I love this, how Howard Thurman put it, the experience of unity is more compelling than the concepts, the fears, and the prejudices that divide us. Okay, so let me share something personal, and this is just really small. So last week I was sitting at my desk, and I found myself having one of those, it's like emergency committee meeting within my head, you know, when you get an email and then you have a lot of big feelings. There I was, staring at an email from someone who had hurt me years ago, now asking for a reference. So my inner committee is in full swing. There's righteous me. I mean, you've seen all of these, okay, when I've acted them out. Righteous me, noting every past grievance. Then there's spiritual me. I can quote scriptures and I can be pretty smug. Or practical me, thinking, well, maybe if I just say that my internet's down for a month. Any of you heard about the 24-hour rule? Yeah, it helps, doesn't it? And that 24 hours, back to what Howard Thurman described, it's engaging in what he describes as the unscrambling process. This is very important, the unscrambling process within my own heart. And I can still remember untangling Christmas lights. You know, it's like, it's hard enough when it's light, but it's Christmas lights in the dark. Sometimes we don't even know what's going on. We need to take some time out. Back to children's moment. I need a time out to understand why I'm so mad. And that's minor, what I just talked about. Let's talk about the depths of human pain. About the parent who walked away and never looked back. Leaving a void no amount of success will ever fill in that child. About the partner whose betrayal destroyed not just a marriage, but the ability to trust. About the abuser who stole your childhood and left you wondering if you'd ever feel whole. About systems of oppression that crush generations, crush their hope. These aren't just theoretical hurts. They live in our bodies. They wake us. at 3 a.m. They make us build walls so high that nothing can get in, and we can barely breathe. Any of you know these walls? So let me be clear. Your anger is holy. I want to say that again. Your anger is holy. Your pain is legitimate. When Jesus talks about loving enemies, he's not just asking us to pretend that these wounds don't matter, be a doormat, turn the other cheek. He's not telling us to smile and say it's okay. Sometimes I believe the deepest expressions of our faith is the rage we bring to God's altar. Look at the psalmists, look at Lamentations. They call for God's justice with language that's so raw, you'll never see it in the lectionary. Churches won't even read these passages out loud, but they're there. But here's what I've learned from sitting with both survivors and perpetrators. Hatred, and from my own experience, hatred, no matter how justified, ultimately becomes a prison. It restricts our hearts. It imprisons us. The walls that we set to protect ourselves become a prison. And it makes our world smaller and smaller until there's barely room to breathe. And so what Thurman talked about, this process of unscrambling, the time out that we all had as kids, I think it's really critical to understanding what it means to love our enemies. It's an untangling, just like those Christmas lights. Untangling out, separating our legitimate needs for justice from our desire for revenge. Two different things. One is reaction, the other is response. Separating our righteous anger at wrongdoing from our tendency to dehumanize those who wrong us. And distinguishing between holding people accountable and holding on to bitterness. So the challenge Jesus puts forth and Joseph demonstrates isn't just to love those who are easy to love, those who share our values, those who love us, those who validate our worldview. The challenge is to love precisely when love seems impossible. To love across the chasms of political division in our country, the wounds of historical injustice, the barriers of prejudice and fear. This kind of love is not passive, it's not weak. It doesn't mean accepting injustice or accommodating abuse. As Dr. King reminded us, this kind of love is strong medicine. It is a force that transforms enemies into friends. It is a power that turns conflict into conversation. It is a miracle that makes way for grace to enter through our wounds. So here's my invitation to you this week. And it starts internally. You don't have to practice loving an outside enemy. Choose one part of yourself that you have been at war with. That part of your personality that you try to exile. That past mistake you can't forgive. That weakness you try to hide. You don't have to name it out loud. You know what it is. Now imagine loving that part of yourself, not because you're endorsing it or it deserves it, but because wholeness is who we are becoming. Imagine embracing it, not to be perfect, but just to integrate it consciously. As Howard Thurman reminds us, the word that love is stronger than hate and goes beyond death is the great disclosure to the one who has found that when he or she keeps the door open to their heart, it doesn't matter how many doors are closed against them. This is what Thurman calls love in action, what King called building the beloved community, and what Jesus was pointing to. A new way of being, seeing, living. A way of living that refuses to let hate define us, that insists on seeing the beloved in ourselves and in everyone, even those who deny it within us. And that keeps choosing to love even when love seems futile or foolish. And perhaps that's the greatest miracle of all, that in loving our enemies, we don't just transform them, we transform ourselves. We become more human, more connected, more whole. And for this truth and this challenge and this hope, let us give thanks. Amen.